snapshot of the cities, the big cities. So I'm a Mumbai girl, so born and brought up here. Then moved to Minnesota, that's the middle picture, then Washington, D.C., then Boston for 2 years, then Ohio, then Philadelphia, then Korea, Singapore, and New Jersey before coming back to India. So it's been a sort of 18-year global journey. And I think all of that has really influenced my marketing and management perspective. So that's why I thought it was relevant to highlight that. These are some of the products that I've personally worked on in a marketing capacity. Does anyone recognize these products here? So the left hand first picture, right? That is actually, it's called an NSEAL energy sealing device. It's used by surgeons to seal blood vessels and tissue when they're doing operations. So you can see in the bottom picture that surgeon is my end user or customer. And the reason I put that picture is in product marketing, right? So while I'm not a scientist, while I'm not an engineer, as a marketer, I have to cater to my customer. So when they originally did that design, they realized it required so much force to fire that your average surgeon in Asia, especially um, female surgeons, needed two hands. So imagine you're in the middle of surgery and just to seal a vessel, you have to double hand and seal it. It wasn't very practical. So as a marketer, constantly thinking of my customers and end user needs, right? That was the feedback I gave back to my R&D team and worked on the redesign of it. So what is pictorial over here, I wanted to show you just a sampling of the products I've worked on, and at the bottom are really the end users. And users and customers may not always be the same, right? So that's what I wanted to get at over here. In the glucometer, I think Neet, you mentioned, right, that your father is a patient. So actually you or your mother would also be part of my customer pool, because what we found through some of our market research was in certain countries and cultures, the caregiver is very important. So for example, when we were launching in Saudi and the Middle East, we did a whole campaign on educating caregivers, because it was usually the wife or the mother who was helping the patient test. So just wanted to bring out some of the nuances of marketing in my practical life. The image above the glucometer, any guesses for what that is? That's an insulin pump. So if you're a type 1 diabetic and you need insulin after a meal, this is, it's attached through a sensor and a needle to your midriff, and you can check your blood glucose level and automatically bolus the insulin also. And believe it or not, this product, so type 1 diabetes is very prevalent amongst younger people in America. So I even had patients and customers as young as 7 or 8, and then their parents. You can imagine, for those of you who have children in your family or extended family, imagine having your little child hooked up to this, right? So it's a very different set of requirements you have to think of. Third picture is sutures. So if you look at the suture, follow the purple path, at the end of that is a needle. And if you look at the picture below, I just wanted to sort of show you there is also a skill for surgeons to suture. So I may develop the product, but if people don't have practice suturing, imagine you have to hold the needle in one hand and the wound and you're stitching, but it's in this bizarre sort of tactile environment. So Chirag, I see you smiling and I notice you're a doctor. So have you done this?
No,
Like, can
so
we do a quick round of introductions
I have
also?
completed my undergrad as a dentist. So what we do for oral surgery mainly is that we are taught to suture all of these using different techniques. Considering that the wounds, especially in the head, neck, and face region, generally they require certain sutures which you have to firstly keep dissolvable. Second, they cannot be as they have to be simple as possible, considering the wounds out there which cannot really be aren't firstly not that big, the wounds, especially in the head, neck, and face region. Secondly, we have to suture at almost every possible venue when it comes to extractions of the oral cavity, because that's like one of the cavities where you have the highest number of microorganisms. So you actually have to suture any kind of an open wound that you feel would be infected. So that's the
Correct.
reason. I mean, we've actually practiced this a lot, and so
And it's
I was
tough,
just
right? It's not
nostalgic about
easy,
this. Yes,
correct?
it's
Yeah, it's not easy.
it's not easy. It's not easy.
Yeah, and the reason I bring it up, guys, is in suture. So the company I worked for is Ethicon, and these are obviously premium price sutures. You also have a lot of much cheaper sutures on the market, and I can't comment on their quality or their value added services. But the point Chirag made was right. It is a commodity product, right? So as a marketer, I'm like, how on earth am I justifying a price premium? But like Chirag said, right, for an end user, it's not an easy skill. So as Ethicon, we also have training academies where we go out and help surgeons practice. So again, and we'll get to this, but it's really about knowing your customer needs. So my job as a marketer doesn't just end with the product delivery. It's also servicing everything a customer might. So I'm a very visual person, and I think when you're in marketing, the one skill you always need to know is how does the other side process information. So are they visual, are they listeners, are they readers, and accordingly you have to tailor, because one of the biggest jobs as a marketer I feel is influencing. And it's not just influencing the customer, that's a given, but it's actually influencing my sales team. So depending on the industry you're in, right? Sometimes you need a heavy field force. So I'll just share with you when I look at all these products over here. Um, how many of y'all are familiar with medical devices as an industry? Like, what are some of the companies you've heard of? No problem, because I was exactly like you when I started. I didn't even know this industry existed, let alone that you needed marketing for it. So this is definitely a B2B industry, right? It's not like retail or some of the more glamorous industries, or even like our case today, which is New York Times, goes directly to the consumer, but has a B2B component. Um, I think as a marketer, you always want to know. So you have to understand, where you play and how you go to market. Yeah, about how do you go to market. So we actually have in the device industry several hundred reps depending on your company size, and these medical representatives actually go to surgeons, share with them the latest products, share trainings with them, everything to get them familiar so they can actually use it. And that's why I made that point of you need to know how to even influence your internal people first, because if they are not fluent, if they cannot communicate, then the best marketing strategy will just fall flat. So execution is a very, very important piece of any strategy coming to life. One of the key learnings for me is you have to learn to influence people. To do that, you need to know how they learn, how they digest information. So that's a very tactical piece. If I zoom out, I think the primary role of a marketer is really understanding your customer and how you add value to them. So I'm sure you've seen in your different degrees and courses, right? Like the product is just one piece of it. And I know this is a product marketing sort of session, but as a marketer, you have to think beyond just the product. So by that, I mean, how will it be used? Who will use it? In what situations will they use it? Can I help them make it any easier? Is there an access issue? And all that sort of filters back into your go-to market model, which is your pricing, which is also the other additional value add services that you get. So I'd like to, I shared with you one anecdote about NSEAL, so that surgical device, about the design and user feedback. So with any in marketing, typically depending on where you are, you have upstream marketing where you're working closely with R&D, whether you're in the food industry or medical, even if you're in fashion. I imagine you're in, there is someone who's doing new product development, right? The latest styles, working with the designers. So your job there as a marketer is communicating those customer needs, right? So you can tweak them, make it a better product. Different products and different industries have different product life cycles. I think we're all familiar in the auto industry, right? You get new cars once a year at a fixed time. So that's a very well established cycle. In fashion, you get it in certain seasons. In my industry, healthcare, medical, there's no such season. It's a very regulated industry. So everything that we launch has to go through a lot of FDA testing, clinical trials, data to show that it's safe. So that's what determines our go-to-market model. In the New York Times case, if you recall, it's not that regulated, and because it's digital, it's a much faster go live timeline. So I think those are just some of the nuances of where marketing can play. Another marketing role that I've had in my experience, so besides global marketing, was also regional. So when you look at that one touch meter, I was actually doing an Asia Pacific role. I was based out of Korea, and I was responsible for all our regional markets. And regional marketing is another completely different role because typically you get product from a global location and you've got to regionalize it. Um, and right now, where I'm selling medicines in India, it's very much a local role. So I had the marketing team pan India. I have a group of 6 marketeers. We have 300 sales reps. It's very, very operational, tactical, right from do I have enough CFAs delivering product? Am I forecasting my product? Are my sales reps saying the right things to doctors in the 1 minute they get in a doctor's chamber, right? So I share this with you because you can see there's a range of marketing right from upstream where there's a lot more strategy to downstream where it's a highly operational and much more fast-paced role. So perfect. So I just wanted to give you that context of my marketing journey and the spectrum of roles that I see. Like I said, the customer is always front and center no matter what your role, right? So when you're on the upstream side, you're designing the product, you've really got to think of how they use it. When you're in a regional role, your customers may not always be the end user. So I'll give you an example. It may be a distributor, it may be the chemist or the pharmacy, it may be the caregiver, right? So, for example, in Meet's case, he mentioned his dad has a glucometer. It could be his Meet's mother, whoever helps Meet's dad with his testing. And as a marketer, your role is to also consider these users, and you always want to get insights. So everything that I tell my team to do, every campaign, every message, I'm like, don't do it because it sounds like a cool idea. I'm like, what is the insight you've based it on? By insight, so an insight is not a fact. So if I just say the sun rises in the east, that's a fact. The question is, so what? Like, what difference does that make to my usage of whatever? And that insight is what we as marketers use to create a compelling communication. You'll also agree that in today's day and age, we're constantly bombarded. Like one of the biggest challenges I face in my current role is that doctors literally give us a minute, if I'm lucky, in their chambers. And I don't blame them. They've got hundreds of patients, they've got a lot of administrative things to do. In 40 years ago, when I talked to family who are doctors, they said the medical rep was a very important source of information. So the MR actually would get time in the doctor's clinic. He would talk about clinical data. Because remember, doctors get their medical information on pharmacology in school, the MBBS, MD. After that, unless they do CMEs or attend online courses, they may not know what the latest molecule is, right? So this is where the MR or the sales rep comes in. It's to give that scientific education. Of course, you also have companies today, I'm really sad to say, who literally just bribe doctors into prescribing, but that's not what Johnson and Johnson stands for. So we truly are looking at science. But as a marketer, my biggest struggle for my team right now is, they'll create these 20-page visual aids. The doctors don't have time to read it, and my rep doesn't get a chance to go beyond the second page. So the challenge I've given my team right now is, how do you tell your story? So for example, Cybelium, the medicine I've shown here, is a migraine prophylactic, which means you don't use it when you get a migraine, you use it before to prevent it, right? And any migraine treatment typically should be used for 3 months, especially this one, the data shows to be effective. Now, I need at least 15 seconds to communicate that to a doctor. Think of a consulting physician, right? He sees, so we just looked at the data actually this week. The CP in India, the top 5 cases they see are hypertension or blood pressure, followed by diabetes, followed by fever, followed by insulin diabetes, and then another condition. So imagine my customer, right? He's constantly seeing these patients with these diseases. If someone comes in complaining of migraine, it's almost 25th in the diseases he or she sees. So their willingness to learn about it, give me time, is hit or miss. So as a marketer, my job is to train my sales rep to probe, find out how many migraine patients does a customer see. If he sees a lot or once in a while, this is the message you should give him. Obviously, the way I'm saying it right now, it sounds like a beautiful algorithm, right? In real life, it doesn't work that way. I may have the best training, my sales rep may be the best person, but when you go to a doctor's chamber, if he's like, "Arey, yahan se niklo, abhi mere paas 10 patients hai," like, what do you say? You have to leave, right? So I'm just trying to give you the practical challenges of marketing, especially in this current role of mine. So that's sort of the customer facing piece. There's a lot that goes on in the back end when you're a marketing person. I mentioned supply chain. So one thing I always have to remember and remind my teams is, guys, if you do your job well and generate demand for the product, there's no point of generating demand if it can't be fulfilled. And what do I mean by that? If there's a stock out, right? So imagine how annoyed patients, doctors, anyone would be if they couldn't get my product after making them excited for it. So the other piece of marketing is also managing your supply chain, working very closely with your supply chain partners to understand lead times, to understand inventory levels. And that gets into the finance bit also. Again, I'm not a financier, but when I look at my whole OPEX as a marketing head, I need to look at my days of inventory. I need to make sure that I'm not carrying too much or too little for a stock out. So marketing, in my view, is that perfect blend of being at the hub, uh, at the hub of a wheel, and you're coordinating with supply chain, finance, you're creating the strategy, talking to sales, and then depending on your industry, you might have a whole lot of other functions. So for me, for example, regulatory, medical affairs, legal is very important. One of the biggest jobs I do in marketing is generate claims, so product claims. For example, if I say that my medicine acts in 17 minutes and I publish that on my packaging, on my campaigns, I need to have data on file that proves it, because otherwise it's misleading. And that's where the legal review comes in. So there's a whole lot of work that goes into the back end. That's the second piece, right? Supply chain, finance, getting the product to market. The third piece, honestly, I would say is that I personally am focused on is also upskilling my team. So the marketing that I did 10 years ago is very different from today's marketing. And I think, Chirag, you just mentioned, right, that you worked for a telemedicine um, and health automation. Healthcare also, as we know it, is changing. So as a marketer, I have to build my team's capabilities, whether it's digital marketing. So the way you write copy for a digital campaign is completely different from a print one. Similarly, my team, for example, now instead of static visual aids, we're looking at interactive PDFs, games, something to cut through the noise and make us stand out and get that one extra minute in a doctor's chamber or with that end user and customer.
I just want to hear from you maybe one of the interesting conversations that people had with doctors and that led to a learning in sort of marketing that you guys do. Because I know in real life there are conversations which we think are not that relevant, but that comes up as a learning for us. So any sort of funniest conversation or something which led to learning is there?
Sure, I think my biggest takeaway, and I mean, I guess this is a highly personal comment because it's my context. So, in medical devices, the sales rep actually sits in surgeries, especially when it's a new product launch. Obviously, the rep cannot participate, cannot be near the patient, but he or she is usually there in case the surgeon has any product question. So, for example, they're firing that NC gun on a vessel and they're like, hey, it's sticking, what should I do? And the rep may say, press this button, right? So, that is the level of access that the rep has. When I took on this role in my current pharma role, it was really interesting to me to see our sales reps were almost bowing down to the doctors, and I was horrified. I'm like, ऐसे सिर झुका के जा रहे हैं saying, doctor, thank you. I'm like, what is this? I'm like, this is not darshan, right? Yes, doctors can be like gods, but what is this power dynamic? And that's when I realized that there is a power dynamic um, in different sectors of the industry also. And there were doctors that are really nice who treat the sales rep with respect, but I also have seen a lot of doctors who are so rude to the sales guys and just say, "Yahan se niklo, I don't have time." And so this is not an interesting conversation with the doctor, but it was my own aha and insight. Like, let's take the power back. Like, how do I make my guys more confident so they're not literally bowing down and touching the doctor's feet? Because look, tomorrow if I come in front of you and I'm like, hey, please, think of Talorang, just do this versus sound confident, you're going to treat me very differently. And I know this is a very young crowd, so you might find this really funny, but this is a reality. So as a head of marketing, that was one thing I wanted to change. It's like, how do I get confidence back in my sales reps? How do I establish credibility in the doctor's chamber so I can have that conversation?
So Aarti, how exactly did you overcome that thing? I mean, that's something that really interests me because I'd like to understand how you change the power dynamics wherein you actually made your team as confident. Because from what I also have seen is that generally they have to follow some kind of a an already predetermined route that this is a senior doctor, so that's where we need to be a little more uh, you know uh, respectable to him. Although I mean that's not necessary. Frankly, it's really rude of many of these doctors that I've seen who don't really give these reps enough time, and rather it's during their lunch break or something, which is like 2 to 3 minutes. They're like, come, sit, and go. So that's like something which I've seen, which is very inhumane. So I just wanted to understand how you actually change the power dynamic. Is there some kind of a strategy that you use? Did you do internal training? How does it work?
Yeah. So I mean, we still haven't changed it. And sorry, who asked that question? I'm not getting the
Chirag.
Chirag. Okay, thanks, Chirag. So it's a work in progress. So I don't want to claim I've changed it. I would love to claim it, but I haven't. We're really focusing on the learning agility. And so this brings me to my other observation, right? Who are the people joining sales jobs currently? So as a head of marketing, I also have to see the talent coming in. 40 years ago, the rep I got was great in English, had impeccable social skills and manners. And today, that same rep's child has become a surgeon at AIMS, is studying in America, and or is in advertising. That rep's child does not become a rep. The reps I'm getting are people who maybe were interested in pharmacy, couldn't get into medicine, didn't join IT. So it goes back, Chirag, to that point of when I have to build up their confidence, I do it in a variety of ways. One is product knowledge, message delivery, constant coaching, and role plays. The other piece is also grooming, and obviously for that I have to be very careful because I work for an MNC. We have to, we want people to be their authentic selves, but we also want them to grow their confidence muscles. So we do a lot of different exercises for that. We do things like joint field work where I'll go out on the field. Doctors sometimes will treat me with a lot more respect when they see someone from the head office dressed in a sari. So we do a mix of in classroom role plays, real life joint field work, reflections. And honestly, you have to constantly hammer at it because I mean, I'm teaching them things like conversation. I'm teaching them things like comprehension sometimes. So it's a very exhausting journey, but we've got a fantastic L&D team that's very passionate about it. And one thing you'll notice is in this industry, there's a lot of purpose. So all these reps, like we always say, you're not just talking about medicines. Pharma gets a bad reputation, but for those patients, the right medication is really a matter of life and death. So one of the medications we sell is for pain. We also sell a patch for patients with cancer. So, we really touch people in sometimes the saddest part of their lives. And I think to know that you can give them that relief, and that's what I keep reminding my people. Like, that's what makes them get up every day, face that rejection. Sales is not easy. So I know today it's on product marketing, but I think sales is one of the hardest jobs in the world because you've got to be resilient. You've got to hear 100 no's before you hear one yes, and I think to me that's the hallmark of a solid salesperson. So I have to equip my guys because some my competitors go with checkbooks and say doctor kitna chahiye
Right.
likhne ke liye. I don't have that.
Oh,
I only have my rep, so I'm up against. So another piece is marketing, right? You have to know your competitors. None of us operates in a silo.
right.
So price is one way to compete, but I am a premium product company, right? I give a lot of value added services. I have a lot of data. I have a lot of testing that doesn't come cheap. I will never be able to compete against the generics, and I don't want to compete against them, right? But how do my sales guy, right? I think one of you, I think Kiran, you mentioned, right? When you see people, you'll see 25, 30 reps out there. Obviously, they're friends and they're talking, right? And they'll say, "अरे हमने डॉक्टर को ये दिया, वो दिया," and my guy is like, "हाँ, मैंने तो science दिया." So how do I make him feel good? Like, hey, that's your job, do that. So competition is another very important piece of marketing. And I don't think a lot of brands do that properly. Like, I always tell people you should be paranoid about competitors. I have been in a company, so LifeScan, the middle one, the glucometer, we lost overnight 70% of our top line when the US market reimbursement reduced. So from I think $1.50, we reduced it by 70. So from a 1 billion revenue, I went overnight to 300 million, like literally in a month. And was I ready as a company? No. So I'm just saying in marketing, competition and keeping your eye on that is equally important, and never be inward facing, which sometimes I see a lot of brands who are market leaders do. Not everyone can afford to do that.